Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you guys are having a good morning and a good second day at AirVenture. We'll do some quick introductions here. There you go. My name's Cole Crawford. I'm one of the product managers here at ForeFlight. I'm also a commercial instrument-rated pilot. And with me, I have a special guest today, John Zimmerman from Sporties. I like to say we used to put the qualifications, the pilot qualifications up here, but John has all of the ratings, and so I run out of room on the slide to do that. So he's the president of Sporties Pilot Shop and one of our good partners. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. Just generally speaking, this is going to be a focused discussion on flying with ADS-B traffic and weather and SiriusXM and some of those in-flight features of ForeFlight. But we also can help you anytime, 7 days a week at team@foreflight.com. We have real pilots there ready to support you in how to use our applications. Just last year, we launched our new Sentry device called Sentry Plus here. This is a graphic rendering of what it looks like. We'll be talking a little bit more about this product as well as we go throughout the presentation. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So first of all, we're going to talk about what is a connected cockpit. We're going to take a look at some specific features within that, like really deep dive into some very specific things that lots of pilots are using. We'll talk a little bit about how you can find the right solution for the type of flying you're doing, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So let's get started. So why do you care about a connected cockpit? What's the purpose? Well, the primary purpose is situational awareness, redundancy with your panel, and fatigue reduction, right? All three of those things are designed to help make you a safer pilot. So we're going to talk a little bit about some specific features here. This first one about GPS, this may seem obvious to those of you that have been using ForeFlight for a long period of time, but here's what ForeFlight looks like. You can see the airplane icon there on the map. I've highlighted it here in red. It seems quite simple, but one of the core features and one of the first things ForeFlight ever did was show your airplane on a moving map. So you can see where you are relative to the airspace around you, but it's a lot more than just a moving map. GPS is essential for powering things like our cockpit instruments, so you can see what your estimated time en route is, what your time of arrival is, how high you are above terrain, lots of things like that. But it's also to do things that are a lot more new, things like showing your position on a chart itself. So for example, you're flying an approach here, you can see where your airplane is on that piece of paper. All in context of everything else on your map. And this right here alone, especially when you're learning to fly instrument approaches for the first time, can greatly reduce your workload because you're not having to go translate in your mind, where am I on this particular chart? Oftentimes people think of georeferenced charts as just important for IFR pilots, but it also applies to taxi diagrams and other airport diagrams. You can see here, I'm showing where I am on this particular airport diagram, which is great for landing at an airport that you might be new to or unfamiliar with that has all kinds of taxiways. Now you can actually see how far am I from taxiway Lima or how far am I from taxiway Charlie. There's a lot of different things you can do here with just these two specific things. John, why don't you tell me a little bit about some of your time before flying with GPS and a moving map and what changed here?
Yeah, there's so many things this unlocks. We all take GPS for granted these days, and that's because we all have it. But I like to make sure people are using all the things GPS unlocks. One simple thing is in-flight performance calculation. So you did your pre-flight planning, you thought you had a good winds aloft forecast, you thought you knew how much gas you needed. GPS is a great way in flight to check that and say, well, my ground speed I thought was going to be 135 knots and it's actually 120 knots. That should be a little red flag that the winds aloft forecasts were off. I need to recompute some fuel burn numbers. So there's that kind of constant updating part of it. I also love this feature on the ground. I landed here at Oshkosh about a month ago, actually, which is very bizarre because there was no show. There were no green dots. But if you've noticed, there are a bunch of runways. And when it's not AirVenture, they're not all closed. So I landed on 1-8 and had to go to the north end of the airport. And I got a really crazy taxi because you've got to cross 3 different runways to get there. And so the combination of this georeferenced taxi chart plus annotations, which you can do in ForeFlight, I just basically drew my taxi clearance. Left on Bravo, left on Alpha, hold short of whatever it is, 1-3, and I draw a red line there. And it's much easier than trying to scribble numbers that you can get wrong. So that's one of those where putting it all together, to me, makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a great example. I always am looking at the taxi chart after I land at night and I pull off a runway, I always look down at the taxi chart, figure out where am I going, because taxiing around at night, especially on a poorly lit airport, is no fun. So we'll talk a little bit about how do you get this on your ForeFlight. Well, there's 3 ways to get GPS on your ForeFlight. Number 1 is the cellular iPad. Number 2 is a portable GPS unit, like the Sentry here. And the 3rd way is if you connect directly to your avionics. I'm going to touch on all 3 of these because there's pros and cons to all of them, and they're not all equal, and there's some reasons why here. So the first one is the cellular iPad. This is probably what everyone is most familiar with. Your iPhone, when you buy it, it just shows where your position is. If you do go with the cellular iPad option, note that only the iPads that have cellular or are cellular enabled have the ability to have GPS. Even if you don't pay for the cell service, you don't pay Verizon for it or whomever, it's still required in order to be able to have a GPS chip in the iPad. So make sure you're buying the cellular iPad if this is the route you're going. The second route is the portable GPSs. There's a bunch of different products you can have here. This is the product we make. We make Sentry, Sentry Plus, and Sentry Mini. They all have WAAS-capable GPSs in them, which is important. The reason you might go with a portable system as opposed to one connected to your aircraft or with your iPad is that this is independent from your airplane, right? So if there's something if you were to have an electrical failure and you were using your airplane's GPS, well then you've now lost it on your iPad and on your airplane, which is not so great. Like I said, these have WAAS level accuracy, so you're getting a much higher position resolution than you are with your iPad. But probably little known fact and more interesting about these devices is they are also multi-constellation, which means they are jam resistant and spoof resistant. So if you're not familiar with this, we'll go forward 1 slide here, but you'll start noticing if you're looking at NOTAMs recently, there's more and more GPS jamming outages and exercises going on across the United States. If you fly into a GPS jamming exercise unintentionally, you didn't read the NOTAM, or if you saw what happened in Dallas last year where it wasn't an exercise, someone was jamming GPS in the DFW metro area, your airplane will not know where it is, at least not by RNAV. Well, the way the Sentries are designed is that they're multi-constellation. So if someone's jamming GPS, they'll just switch to GLONASS or any of the other constellations out there for GNSS. And here's an image of a TBM pilot here. And this is a tweet. He said, White Sands was jamming GPS today, causing all the airliners to get vectors from air traffic. My panel went down too, but ForeFlight was all good with the Sentry, and I still had 1 meter accuracy and no problems navigating. And this is I think a G1000 Cockpit here in its TBM that went down. So the third option is connecting your iPad directly to your panel GPS. I'm going to talk a little bit about the buying guide in a little bit. There's a ton of different panels that we support directly, and you can go find that list of panels that we support integrations with in our buying guide. I'll kind of point to that a few times today. But the great thing about connecting directly to your panel is you're using the same thing as what your panel has, which means that your position will always match between your panel and your iPad. Number 2 is you have a slight advantage because the GPS antenna on your airplane is mounted outside of your airplane, so it's a slightly better view of the sky. And the third is that you're going to have the same position resolution as whatever you've installed on your panel. So we're going to talk a little bit about traffic. Traffic is a feature that our customers love and we're really excited about. We think it's one of the biggest improvements in safety that we've offered to the general aviation industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit generically about traffic in ForeFlight, and then we'll do a deep dive into ADS-B traffic. So there are 3 sources of traffic these days that you can get into ForeFlight. The first is what you probably all know, ADS-B traffic. The second is FLARM traffic. FLARM is a traffic protocol that's used more broadly in Europe, so I'm not going to touch too deeply on that today. And the third is our internet traffic source. So internet traffic is, here's a picture here. We released this about 2 or 3 years ago. So internet traffic is basically a feed coming from FlightAware. It's just a crowdsourced feed of traffic over the internet into your device. This is great for checking out while you're at home to see which direction the pattern is going or what approach is in use or how busy the airport is. But this is not designed and should never be used for in-flight detect and avoidance. It's not designed for that in any way. There's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do that. I'm not going to go into the technical details here. So it's disabled once you're airborne. But just to know, it is pretty interesting while you're at home, check it out. Or a lot of people use this at home when they can't come to Oshkosh. You'll see people zooming in on internet traffic and showing the conga line coming in. FLARM Traffic, like I mentioned, this is an air-to-air only traffic protocol. So if you're flying in Europe, this might be of interest to you, but a lot of gliders in Europe will use FLARM, and this is a technology you can use to find those gliders and see them on your iPad. And the main one that we all know about is ADS-B traffic, and there's actually a couple different flavors of it, but effectively the thing to know is that there are actually two frequencies that the FAA authorizes airplanes to use for ADS-B compliance. There's the 1090 megahertz frequency and the 978 megahertz frequency. And really, to boil that all down, the thing you need to know as a pilot is whatever your ADS-B in source is needs to be dual band. That's the key. You should make sure that whatever source of ADS-B traffic you're getting, it's a dual band receiver. And that will make sure you're seeing all of the ADS-B traffic targets that you can see. So you're getting the whole traffic picture. ADS-B is a really interesting technology. There's a lot of questions that we get from people about how does it actually work, what airplanes will I and will I not see. And John at Sporty's created these great slides that explain this in great detail, so I'm going to let John hit this.
Yes, this has gotten a little easier since 2020 with the FAA mandate for most of us to equip with ADS-B out. So many more airplanes now have ADS-B out in the panel compared to 5 or 6 years ago, but not all of them. So there's a couple different ways, as Cole said, to get ADS-B traffic. This is scenario one. So in this case, let's say we've got our Sentry mounted on the side window. We fire up ForeFlight. And I'm going to see all the airplanes that are ADS-B out equipped, because ADS-B out airplanes are constantly transmitting their position and velocity 1 time per second. So if we have Sentry turned on, it picks up those transmissions, it shows us that airplane. Pretty simple. But note that the one thing we won't see is we won't see a Mode C airplane. So an airplane that doesn't have ADS-B out, they just have a regular old transponder. We have no way to see that in this scenario. However, if we go to scenario 2, we can take advantage of the ADS-B ground stations. Those are the ones that pump out the weather, which we'll talk about here in a minute. They broadcast weather all over the US, but they also broadcast traffic. The only difference is they only broadcast traffic to airplanes that are ADS-B out equipped. So in our case, if we're flying with a Sentry and we have ADS-B in the panel, maybe it's a Garmin GTX 335 or it's built into our glass cockpit, a G3X, whatever it might be. If we are broadcasting ADS-B out, we can also receive ADS-B in traffic from those ground stations. The benefit there is it fills in our Mode C targets if we're around an airplane with ADS-B out. So you can see here, we see that Cessna that is not ADS-B out equipped, so we're not getting that air-to-air, we're not getting that direct transmission, but we are getting it updated from the ground station. Now in this case, we actually don't have ADS-B out, we're just close to another airplane that is ADS-B out, so we're kind of living in his hockey puck, as we call it. So we see that one Mode C target, but we still don't see that other one out there because that hockey puck is not centered on us. Again, it's only sent to the airplanes that are ADS-B out equipped. Got to participate to get that traffic uplink. So obviously scenario 3 is the best. This is where hopefully many of you are today. You've put ADS-B out in your panel to comply with the mandate, but that means the hockey puck is centered on you. So you're going to see all traffic plus or minus 3,500 feet and 30 miles. So that's not just ADS-B out equipped airplanes, that's everything Mode C. So that's basically everything other than maybe a vintage airplane with no electrical system or a glider. So not all traffic, but almost all traffic. The end result of all that is, if you've got a Sentry or Stratus or any type of portable ADS-B receiver and you've got ADS-B out in your panel, you're going to get a really nice, robust traffic picture all around you. And it's not just going to be the airplanes that are ADS-B out equipped. So it's complicated, but the good news is most of you are going to see a whole lot of traffic out there with a portable receiver.
Great explanation, John. Let's talk about what you can do. Like, why do you? It's intuitive to most pilots, but we'll talk a little bit about why do you care about having traffic on your iPad. Well, the first, most obvious thing is traffic alerts. So ForeFlight will issue traffic alerts to you. Most people are, not necessarily aware of how this actually works, but we've changed the way our traffic alerting works about two or so years ago. And basically what we are doing is calculating how long in time it is until you get too close to another aircraft. And we will color code the aircraft yellow when the aircraft is approximately 45 seconds away from closest point of approach, from being a threat. If they get within 25 seconds of being a threat, then we will color code them red and issue you a traffic alert that is both visual, like you're seeing here on the right, and audible. You'll hear that call out, especially if you have your Bluetooth headset connected to your iPad, you'll hear the call out. But traffic, ADS-B traffic is not just for traffic alerts. It's not just specifically for collision avoidance. There's a lot of other situational awareness things you can do with it that will help lower your workload on longer cross countries or flying in the pattern. Some kind of easy ones to talk about are ground targets. Most people don't even realize if you zoom in to the vector map of an airport diagram in ForeFlight and you have ADS-B traffic, you can see the ground targets on the map. It's a little hard to see here with the bright light, but they're color-coded brown. Now this is great for, you're sitting there, you're at a new airport and you're not really sure what taxi instructions you're gonna get. Just hang on a second and watch a few other targets on the map and see where they're taxiing. You can see how busy it is or how long the line might be to depart at the end of the runway. It's also really, really good for low visibility days. John, why don't you talk about that here a little bit?
Yeah, this has obviously been a big focus recently with some very high profile near misses, and I think Cole will talk a little bit more about that in the landing phase particular, but it's important to know even before you hit the power to take off, the situational awareness on the airport. I've started thinking about 3 different situational awarenesses. One is the classic, where am I going, you know, what's my airspeed, what's my altitude. The second one I think about is weather, what's the weather around, where are there thunderstorms, what's the wind. And the third, really as a result of ADS-B traffic, is a traffic situational awareness. Not just where am I and is somebody about to hit me, but what's kind of the bigger picture of traffic around me? Like Cole said, are we landing maybe on the left parallel and we're taking off on the right parallel? You know, are we busy, are we not? Am I number 4 in line? Is there an airplane on short final when I get cleared to take off? There's all kinds of traffic situational awareness things that I think you should be thinking about, not just in the air, but where do mid-airs and near misses happen, right? They happen around airports. So cruising along at 5,000 feet is probably not your biggest threat. It's right here when you haven't even started the takeoff roll, when I think traffic, a lot of people aren't thinking about it, aren't using it, but statistically it's a time we ought to be looking at it. It's very important. And if it's foggy, like the example from last year down in Dallas, Austin, I guess your way, the ATC can't see. They can't see it either. So the old trust but verify, if you're cleared for takeoff, you're cleared to cross a runway, wouldn't hurt to double check it here and make sure there's not an airplane rolling down the runway or on short final.
Yeah, one other situational awareness one that I use a lot is that I do actually use in cruise when you're a couple hours in is, if you're an IMC and you want to change altitudes, maybe it's bumpy, maybe you think that if you go an extra 2,000 feet that you'll get out of clouds. Well, you can check and see if there's someone else at a different altitude by just looking at ADS-B traffic. And you can find out, okay, are they going to be able to issue me that altitude because there's maybe somebody else that I'm in trail or in front of, and so there's not going to be the separation. It's also good for getting pilot reports. If you experience some bumpiness at the altitude you're at and you see another traffic target that's maybe 2,000 or 5,000 feet above you, you can ask ATC and say, hey, can you ask November 1, 2, 3, 4 what the ride report is like, right? Instead of just querying generally to them. I do want to talk about, we released just last month a lot of new ADS-B traffic capabilities, so I want to demo some of them here for you. The first is we just started releasing alerts for when traffic is on the runway that you're approaching. So kind of the situation John alluded to at Austin not too long ago. We've got a demonstration of that here. So you can see here that you're the airplane on approach and there is Southwest Airlines in front of you on the runway you're approaching. And you can see here once you get within a certain time threshold of the runway that you're approaching and there's still a traffic target grounded on that runway, we will issue you an alert to let you know. We'll also do the inverse of that. So in this case, now you are the Southwest Airlines aircraft on the runway and FedEx is approaching you, and we can issue you an alert in that case if there's an airplane on short final. The other feature that we released recently related to traffic is Breadcrumbs. This is actually going to be really cool this week at Oshkosh. We'll probably have some great screenshots of this. But the idea here is we've all had that scenario where we're approaching an airport or maybe we're flying cross country a little lower level than we maybe usually would. And no matter what you do, there seems to be this airplane that's trying to kill you. No matter which way you turn, no matter how you try to avoid them, they just seem to keep turning towards you. And you can't figure out why. Well, now when you tap on a traffic target in ForeFlight, we will show you their track history for whatever we have recorded based on what we've received from them. And it's great because now you can see, what is that person doing? Are they flying a traffic pattern? Are they flying steep turns? Are they doing chandelles? Why are they following me? What is happening? It's great for figuring out which way the traffic pattern is flowing, or things like which approach is in use, all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, I actually used this on the way up here yesterday. I was flying up in a Cirrus, and we had some storms around Cincinnati, and they weren't terrible, but it was one of those, do I go left or do I go right? And I wouldn't make it the deciding factor, but there were 3 airplanes kind of ahead of me, a lot of people coming to Oshkosh, and I tapped on them. They were through the weather, and I looked at their breadcrumb to see which way did they go, which gap did they pick? And now, again, you're PIC, you still have to make the right decision, use all of your knowledge, but I thought that was a great way to kind of think about, okay, well, those 2 airplanes are similar. One was a 182, not a Southwest 737, and he went that way. I can either use that as another piece of data, or I could call ATC and say, hey, how was his ride? Could we get a pilot report from him? It's a great way to kind of crowdsource some knowledge from other pilots when you're flying cross country, you've got some weather to get around. What's the gap everybody's picking? With you could kind of do it before with traffic, but Breadcrumbs makes it incredibly easy. Just tap on it and you see exactly where they went.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can even, if you combine Breadcrumbs with the ForeFlight rubber banding map feature, you can even, if you like their route that they took, you can even rubber band your route to follow their route basically and find waypoints that are along that track line and get a new flight plan built. So that's all we're going to talk about. Or just one thing to mention is the Traffic Breadcrumbs feature is available for our Pro Plus and above subscriptions starting in our June release of this year. So if you're interested in trying to figure out how do I get ADS-B traffic onto my iPad, I'm going to point you to the buying guide. So we have a brochure. You can find it online, and I'll show you the link to it here in a minute. But we also have it in our booth, and in it explains every device that we connect to and what all capabilities it supports. So it's quite a big matrix. So if you're interested in just finding out if your panel is supported or the portable device you have is supported, check out the buying guide, pages 10 through 12. We're going to shift over to talking about datalink weather now. So in-flight weather. A lot of times people like to use the word weather to mean radar, but weather in flight is so much more than just precipitation radar. But we are going to talk about that one first because that's the most sort of visual and visually interesting datalink weather feature. So here's a picture of what ADS-B weather looks like, or ADS-B radar looks like in flight. One of the things I like to highlight on how to use it is I really try to encourage people to not do the red means bad, green means good. It's a lot more complicated than that, and we'll talk a little bit about how to calibrate your eyes and how to do this well in flight. I want to mention that there's one setting that people really like to use, and I personally use this a lot, and this is sort of maybe the next north up, track up debate, but you can either have your FIS-B weather be 4-color on, and what that will do is it'll only show you in 4 different colors: green, yellow, red, pink. Or you can do the more granular version on the left with the 4-color off, and it's a bigger gradient of colors that it'll show you there. To tell you the truth, I don't think there's a right answer. I actually use both. When I'm in flight, I typically leave it on 4-color on, but if I'm looking at a system like this, then I will flip it back and forth just to kind of see what's happening and get a better picture of what's happening in the atmosphere. But in general, all of the legends and what these colors mean are all in the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile. You can see all the legends and learn more about how this works. Some other ADS-B weather features that are really interesting is cloud tops. This will help you find how high do you need to climb in order to top the clouds and so you can get out of IMC. One that's very often overlooked is the PIREPS layer. I find this to be really fun in flight is submit a PIREP over the radio and wait a few minutes and it'll show up on your iPad over FIS-B weather. This is great because this is one of the only products that is actually measured by real pilots in the sky. Most of these other products that you see while you're in flight are actually models that are basically trying to forecast this stuff, whereas PIREPs are real people saying this was what happened at this time, right? It's a great source of information. Then there's all of the textual weather products like METARs, TAFs, winds aloft. So what we're going to do is talk about how to actually use all this information. So John, you usually have 3 or 4 main points I'm going to let you hit here.
Yeah, I like to really not get lost in the details of, what's the METAR and is there any red radar? And okay, I'm good. There's, like Cole said, there's a lot more to data link weather than just those features. And I think the biggest overlooked thing is to start with the big picture. Is it an unstable atmosphere out there? Is there a lot of convection? Is it stable? Is there a cold front coming through, or is it a high pressure system? Kind of that basic, some people think boring weather 101 stuff, but it really does matter because, as Cole said, if I've got yellow, but it's kind of a weak warm front, well, it's probably just rain. If I've got yellow and I'm over Kansas and there's a strong cold front, that's probably convective and I want absolutely nothing to do with that. So you've really got to start with that big picture to understand what you're flying in. And then use all those other tools. Is it yellow? Is that good or bad? I don't know. Are there pilot reports? What do the winds aloft show? What do the cloud tops show? What do the SIGMETs or AirMets show? It's using all those different pieces together and go beyond just that radar and METARs. Pilot reports to me is the ultimate example of this. If you've got where you are, what the radar looks like, what the pilot reports are, maybe even the track log or the breadcrumb from the traffic up there, you can get all that information in context and really understand what's actually happening there. So I typically will fly with radar and PIREPs on all the time because those are great indicators of what the weather is up ahead. And then obviously supplement that with METARs and TAFs and other things like that. I love the #1 weather tool in the cockpit is the eyes, still. It doesn't matter what your screen says. If you really don't like the look of a cloud out front, you should not fly through it. And there are countless examples of this, fast building thunderstorms. This data link weather is very, very fresh, but it's still going to be somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes old, depending on the weather product. A lot can happen in 15 minutes. So I use data link weather as a data point, but the decision maker is me, and one of the best weather indicators is your eyes. So always make that decision from what you see in the left seat. Don't let data link weather talk you into a decision you're not comfortable with. And that update time is just part of that delay. If you ever notice in the top left of ForeFlight, there's always a timestamp. It's always showing you the most recent weather data you received. And it'll start to go red if it goes beyond 15, 20 minutes, something like that. If that goes red, you should definitely start troubleshooting right away because you should be constantly getting, especially radar updates, about every 5 minutes. And so if you start to see that going to 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something is wrong, you're looking at old weather data, that's not good. And you can dive into the status menu and see if you're still receiving ADS-B. You can look at the lights on your Sentry, all kinds of things to do. But that should be part of your scan. Just like you scan in flight, I'm checking oil pressure, I'm checking my fuel level, I'm checking my altimeter setting. You should make that part of your scan. What is my data link weather timestamp? Am I getting current weather? It takes half a second, but you should regularly do that. So I like to really understand data link weather as a suite of tools that help me make better decisions, not just as, hey, I have radar, and is it IFR at my destination? I really think it's a suite of tools that helps you think more strategically as a pilot. And that's the way to fly with it also is, this is not designed to go up, get close to a thunderstorm, and pick a soft spot, the famous soft spot that doesn't work out well. This is strategic weather avoidance, right? So if you understand that big picture, if you know how to use it, if you use all the tools, I just change my route to avoid the weather. I'm not going to try to pick through it unless I have onboard radar. I'm going to use it to just go around it. Most of the time, that detour adds 5 minutes. Feels like forever. Most of the time, it's 5 or 10 minutes, and it's much easier to do that and miss the whole weather system than to try to pick your way through it. So just get out of the habit. We all do it. I know I do it. METARs, radar, check. Make sure you're getting all, you paid for it, you might as well use all the tools that are there, right? So there's a whole lot more to be done.
Yeah, I want to mention actually a piece of advice you gave me about 3 years ago or so that's stuck with me is this phrase, calibrating your eyes. And this is kind of a lot about what this last point on the slide is about, is go out there at some point and what you want to do is figure out how to learn this image that I'm seeing on the iPad and all of these pieces of the puzzle I'm seeing together from data link weather equates to that thing in the atmosphere that I can see with my eyes. That way, when in the future you go out and fly for real this time, you can see, okay, this thing that I'm seeing on the iPad, here's what that is going to look like when I get near it, right? And that helps you actually understand what's happening in the atmosphere and make decisions about, is that cloud or is that system convective or is it just rain?
A great example actually is this week with the smoke. You know, a lot of us are used to hearing 10 miles visibility on the METARs, and 10 miles a lot of times really means 30 miles. That's just the most they report. And so I was flying up here yesterday, and there were a lot of places that were 7 miles, 6 miles. Well, if you're used to 30 miles, 6 miles looks pretty scuzzy and hazy out there. And that's just another reason you should, to me, fly with datalink weather on every flight outside the pattern, even if the weather's good, because you'll learn something from it. You'll, like Cole said, you'll calibrate your eyes. So don't make it just a thing you only bring out on bad weather days. You should be using it pretty much on all your flights.
Great advice, John. So let's talk a little bit, how do we actually get datalink weather like these products that we've shown on your iPad? Well, there's two primary ways to get datalink weather, and you can actually have both. Sometimes I fly with both, sometimes I fly with just FIS-B. But the two main ways are FIS-B, which is an FAA product called Flight Information Service Broadcast. And then there's something called SiriusXM, which you may be familiar with from the days of having that in your car. Let's talk a little bit about how these two technologies work and why you might choose one over the other. So FIS-B weather is typically more colloquially called ADS-B weather. And basically, there are ground stations, so this is important to know that this is a terrestrial distributed product, so there's ground stations all over the country that kind of work like an AM radio, and they broadcast this weather information on a loop. And what you need is an ADS-B receiver, ADS-B in receiver, that's listening to this stuff and then transmitting it to your iPad. The thing to know is that because it's ground-based, you will have to, in most parts of the country, it depends on how flat it is and a lot of other things, but basically, you'll need to take off in order to start picking up FIS-B weather because you have to get line of sight to the towers. The two main ways you can buy ADS-B receivers are, there are installed ADS-B in devices that sometimes connect directly to your transponder. And then the other type is the portable products like Sentry. Those are dual band ADS-B in receivers, and so those will connect to ForeFlight, and then they will stream all of that traffic information to your iPad. The second datalink product for datalink weather is SiriusXM. SiriusXM, if you want to get that on your iPad, you need to buy a portable SiriusXM receiver. The pro to the SiriusXM subscription is that it's satellite based, so you don't need to take off to start getting it because you always should have a clear view of the sky unless you're inverted, but in that case, I hope you don't need datalink weather. The downside is SiriusXM is a subscription, right? So you need to pay SiriusXM to have access to their products, their weather products, whereas FIS-B is part of what you get for being a taxpayer. So let's talk a little bit more. I'm not going to go super in depth. There's a lot of differences, especially in the details about how XM works and how FIS-B works. So I'm not going to go super deep into the weeds. There are even some differences around the way the products look visually on the iPad, but the big two things to know are that FIS-B is ground-based and SiriusXM and free, and SiriusXM is satellite-based and has a subscription, right? So consider, where are you flying? Is there a lot of mountainous terrain? How much do you care about the first 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 feet before you have access to datalink? And how much are you willing to pay to have the satellite-based weather? Okay, we're gonna switch to another topic here, flight plan transfer. This is a not as frequently used capability of the app, mostly because a lot of people don't know this exists, but it's something that I love to use on almost all of my cross countries. There's very few flights that I'm not using this capability. So the idea here is you go in and you build your IFR flight plan, you spend all this time getting it set up and filing it, and you get your clearance from ATC, and then you realize, wait a minute, I have 35 waypoints in this flight plan, and I'm going to spend 30 minutes typing this in to my FMS, and that's no fun, right? You have to spend time with the Hobbs meter ticking to do that. So for compatible flight, IFR navigators, basically, we can send your flight plan from the Flights tab or the map directly to your panel. So in this case, what you would do is this flight that I have here from Taos to, I can't see where that is exactly, but out of Taos, what you do is you select it, you press this button in the top right corner, the Send To button, and then you'll have this little context menu show up, and you press Panel, And what you'll see here is this is a panel in our lab in Austin, but you can see that you'll get a message on your Garmin panel or whatever navigator you're using, and it'll show you, hey, you have a new flight plan. Do you want to activate this? So you can tap it there, and you can either save it, so maybe you don't want to activate it right now, but you want to save it for later, or you can press activate, and when you press activate, you'll see it show up on your panel. So it's all right there. And almost all of my flights, this is how I get started. I build my flight plan on my iPad, I hop in the airplane, turn it on, get the engine cranked, avionics on, send it to the panel, and then we're off to the races. Now you can also do this from the map as well. So maybe you've changed something on your map, maybe you've done some rubber banding. You can press that little send to panel button right there you can see highlighted, and then it'll ask you, do you want to load the flight plan from the panel, or do you want to send a flight plan from your iPad to the panel? Because you can do bi-directional with ForeFlight. So in this case, I press send to panel. Now, if you want to load from the panel, you press that little button there that I mentioned, and you press load from panel. I want to mention real quickly one other setting that almost everyone has turned on that uses this, but I'll just mention it. We have something for our Garmin panels called auto receive from panel. And what this does is, let's say you've got your panel set up with your flight plan, you're flying along, and maybe you activate a direct to a different waypoint because ATC gives you a shortcut. Well, what will happen is when you change your flight plan on your panel, the panel will send that change back down to the iPad and will automatically change it for you. And what you'll see here is an alert that shows you like this. It says new flight plan loaded from panel. So that way you can see how we're changing it over time and keep all of those things in sync. John, you and I talk a lot about how to use this with weather. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the flight planning part, if you're an IFR pilot, has been totally changed by this technology and sometimes overlooked. So the pre-flight's great. The old days of calling up ATC and you get whatever clearance you get, and then you spend 10 minutes programming it in. That's over. You can look at the expected route in ForeFlight, you can file it the right way, you can get the expected clearance, you can load it in, that takes seconds. But it's not over when you load your route on the ground. So we've been talking about weather and deviating. And I mentioned earlier about using datalink weather for strategic weather avoidance. So a lot of times what I'll do is, instead of the old days of I need 30 degrees right for 30 miles, then I need 40 degrees left, I'll just change my flight plan. So I'll do the rubber band flight planning, take my route line, tap and hold it, drag it so it's well clear of the bad stuff, and I'll pick a new, a couple VORs or airports or intersections, and I'll just create a new route. And then I'll just tell ATC I'd like to change my route to this. That way they don't have to wonder, how long does he need 30 degrees right? They can just put it in the computer, they can pass it on down the line to the next controller. So once I've got that route approved, I ask ATC for it for weather. They say, sure, clear destination via this. I'll then just take it from ForeFlight, hit a button, and bam, it's in my panel. And on a bad weather cross country, I'm doing that constantly, basically using the datalink weather to find a new route, build a new route in the iPad. It's so much easier on the iPad than trying to do this in the panel. Build a route, and then once you're done, it can have 35 waypoints. It doesn't matter. It can be the ugliest route you've ever seen, and just tap the button, send it to the panel, and off you go. So it's a major time saver. It's, honestly, I never even would have thought to do that before datalink weather and flight plan sync.
Yeah, I'll say for the most part, I always am doing my flight planning and sending to the panel, except for one primary case where I do the opposite. So the reason I'm almost always doing all my flight plan changes and such on my iPad and sending to the panel is I can hold my iPad, it's a much richer display, I don't have like some weird buttonology to remember. You just drag and build using the touch actions on the map in ForeFlight that you're used to, and you send to the panel. The one case where I actually do recommend people load their flight plan from their panel is activating direct twos. When you're on vectors to final for an instrument approach, it's better to just activate that there, and that will automatically come down to ForeFlight, and that way you start that turn as soon as ATC asks you to. So let's talk a little bit about, okay, we've talked about all this fancy flight plan transfer stuff. How do I actually get that with my panel? Well, I'm going to go back to the buying guide that I talked about. The same pages in the buying guide, pages 10 through 12. You can get them in the booth. Here's the link to the buying guide right here. It's foreflight.com/buying-guide-PDF. You download that, you can see there's an area called Flight Plan Transfer, and you can see here's all the FMSs and IFR navigators that we support that capability with, and you can find out if yours is compatible. Note that some brands of navigators do require an extra like SD card or extra little add-on that you have to attach to your panel in order to get the wireless connectivity going, but that will all be explained in that particular brochure. Another feature that people love as far as a backup capability is our attitude indicator and synthetic vision. So here's an image of what that looks like. Note that the synthetic vision view is in our Pro Plus plans and above. But basically what this is an attitude indicator along with a synthetic view of the terrain and obstacles and traffic behind it. But most people don't realize you can actually see traffic actually in our synthetic view, and you can see runways and terrain and all kinds of stuff. What this is really nice for is those things that we're all afraid of having an electrical failure in flight or a vacuum pump failure in flight. This gives you a secondary source that's a backup to help you and get you out of an emergency situation. And what's great is, like I showed on the previous slide, you can also pair this in split screen with your instrument approach or whatever you have on the map, so you can see this all in context at the same time. So oftentimes what I'll do is when I'm shooting an instrument approach, I'll have it set like this. That way, even though my attitude indicator on my plane is still working, it's totally fine, there's nothing wrong with it, when I want to look down at my iPad to look at that approach plate and maybe read the missed approach again or read something off the plate, even though I'm not really staring at the attitude indicator, it's still within my field of view, and it helps me feel less disoriented when I pick my head back up because it's always within my field of view. John, you want to talk anything about what you've heard from customers about how they use this?
Yeah, I mean, the backup is huge here. For me, a Sentry and an iPad with ForeFlight is my flight bag, basically. And it's totally independent backup, right? It's battery powered, it doesn't need my panel at all. So the backup is huge. We've heard many stories of pilots who've lost a vacuum pump, who've had an electrical failure, where this does save them. Should you shoot this to 200.5? Probably not, but if the panel's dark, it's definitely better than, I'm gonna confess, it's better than my old needle ball and airspeed skills. I'll take that. But it's not just backup. I use this on cross countries. If I'm low and slow, I fly helicopters sometimes, and we go cross country at 700 feet. And it's great for obstacles. So you mentioned traffic, which is great, but it's also great for obstacles. Yeah, you shouldn't be weaving through windmills with it, but it's great for situational awareness. If you're down low and slow, where's my terrain? Where are my obstacles? It gives you, at a glance, if you're trying to keep your eyes outside, in about 1 second of that synthetic vision view, you get a real good sense for terrain and obstacles. So I use it all the time, not just as a backup.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't do a lot of low and slow flying, but it is a great way to see that kind of stuff synthetically. The other place you'll see attitude show up is actually in our track logs if you're using our track log feature for debriefing. And if you start using Cloud Ahoy for debriefing as well, you'll see the attitude from Sentry devices show up there as well. So you can see what your pitch and bank were while you're doing steep turns or whatever kind of maneuvers you want to look at. If you want to figure out how to get a source of attitude indication on your iPad, again, I'm going to pitch you to the buying guide. Here it is here. You can see what the options are for attitude. So I want to talk a little bit about how do you put this all together. Like, there's a lot of different options for how you could get some of these connected cockpit features on your iPad. So what I tell people is really think through what kind of flying you're doing a lot. Like we've mentioned a lot of different scenarios. You got the guy flying low and slow in a helicopter. You got me flying cross-country IFR. Really think through what are your primary missions. Think about what's already in your aircraft, right? You don't need to go buy a new IFR navigator if you already have an IFR navigator. Think through what capabilities are there. The other big one when it comes to portables is think about how important redundancy is to you. What things would you like to have redundant from your panel, and what things maybe don't matter to you as far as redundancy. The other thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about extras in a second, but consider the extras. A lot of these devices have specific things they can do extra that others can't, that you might be interested in specifically. So we'll talk about some of these extras. And then lastly, to kind of put all this together, go check out a copy of our buying guide, figure out what's in there, what you already have, and you can kind of put together how you can piece this together for your airplane. So some of the extras that I mentioned. So there's other types of things that you can get out of some of these products that aren't necessarily related to datalink weather or traffic, and may not even be used in flight. But I'll mention a couple big ones. The first that has been really important in the last couple years is carbon monoxide detection. So some of our products, the Sentry and the Sentry Plus, have digital carbon monoxide detectors in them, and they will warn you both visually and audibly if there is dangerous levels of carbon monoxide. Some of these devices can store track logs on the device itself. That way you don't have to worry about starting your track log and stopping your track log in ForeFlight. And the other one you might care a lot about if you're going to go the portable route is battery life, right? If you're going to use a portable, then you need to be thinking about how am I going to make sure this is working for the entire duration of my trip, which could be having a backup battery, it could be plugging it into your airplane, it could just be making sure it has plenty of battery life. I want to hit specifically on the carbon monoxide monitoring. So like I mentioned, our Sentry products will both visually and audibly alert you of dangerous levels of carbon monoxide. So on the Sentry, there's actually one up here, I'll show it here in a minute. It has an alarm built in, so even if you're not connected to ForeFlight at all, it will still alarm, and it has a light, and then if you are connected to ForeFlight, we'll give you an audible and visual alert on your iPad. I want to show a quick demo from some customers. We actually get a lot of customers that fly with Sentry talk about near misses with carbon monoxide, and I want to just share a quick video about that.
I was a firefighter and a flight paramedic. I was flying with one of my students who also was a firefighter.
A student of mine, he purchased a Cessna 210 and he wanted me to work with him.
My wife and I were returning from Houston area up to the Northeast Texas, Sulphur Springs. I have a Sentry device.
And he had just bought the Sentry. He was bragging about it, how cool it was, and I knew that it could do carbon monoxide.
And that was the number one reason I got it.
We started getting the CO alarm going off.
We were running around, I think 8,000 feet or so. I noticed that I got a CO alert.
And all of a sudden I saw this notification, and then also the alarm was going off on the Sentry.
My wife was sleepy and drowsy.
I have to tell you, there was no sign of it.
We have SOGs, standard operating guidelines at the fire department. According to our SOGs, also, if anybody was present in the building at that time, we would have to call an ambulance and have them evaluated further due to that high of a level of carbon monoxide. I was shocked by how quickly carbon monoxide can become an issue. The mechanic looked at the plane and
he called me back after one day and said, "Hey, yeah, you got cracks through your manifold, man, lots of them."
Some of the panels underneath were not sealed.
And basically all the exhaust was being ducted directly into the cabin.
It doesn't smell, it doesn't have a color.
It's tasteless. You can't detect it with your natural senses.
Carbon monoxide is so sticky to the blood that the blood wants it more than it wants the oxygen.
If we didn't have our Sentry connected to my iPad and ForeFlight, we would never know.
It made a believer out of me.
I'm pretty sure something bad probably would have happened if we hadn't had the Sentry.
I had a carbon monoxide scare about 3 years ago. Aircraft was less than 7 years old. I thought there's no way we'll have carbon monoxide. But the light started going off, it started beeping at me, and I did what all pilots do. Why is that thing going off? You know, that's so annoying. Long story short, got back and there was a hole the size of a quarter in my exhaust. So CO was absolutely pouring into the cockpit. I'm convinced I probably would not be here if I did not have a CO detector on board. So I got religion real quick that day, and I think you absolutely should fly with a CO detector if you're in a piston airplane of any kind. I also think the advantage with a Sentry like this is the device itself alerts, as Cole said. The light will flash, it'll send out an audio alert, but it'll also pop up on your screen, and if you're paired your headset via Bluetooth to your iPad, you'll get another audio alert, because trust me, having been there, you need to be bashed over the head. A little spot on the panel is not going to do it. You need to be annoyed to the point where you're angry before you will take action. I know I did. So the fact that this has so many alert modes, I think makes it the ideal way to get a CO detector in the cockpit. You're going to be looking at ForeFlight anyway, right? It's what I depend on. And so if it pops up there with a CO warning, it will get your attention.
The other extra I want to talk a little bit about, and I mentioned earlier, is the flight data recording capabilities. So some of these devices, like Sentry Plus, can record track logs on board their processor directly. And what's great about that is you don't have to worry about what your iPad's doing. As soon as you turn the device on, it's recording your flight, and as soon as you turn it off, it stops recording your flight, and it automatically loads these into your track logs and logbook for you. So we're going to show here a quick demo of how that works. So what you do is you go to devices, or sorry, you go to track logs, you click the little import button in the top left, you click from Sentry Plus, and it'll load all of your flights. You can tap on one, and it'll start downloading it. If you want to learn more about any of these topics, you can go check out our Pilot's Guide. If you're not familiar with the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile, it's probably the single best resource available on how to use ForeFlight and how things work. You can get it directly on your app by just going to the Documents section, go to the catalog, look for ForeFlight, and you'll see the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile. You can also watch our whole library of videos at foreflight.com/videos, and we release more information about latest releases and other stuff on our blog at blog.foreflight.com. And lastly, you can learn more by going to team@foreflight.com. If you email us there, our pilot support team is available 7 days a week and always happy to help. With that being said, I want to move to Q&A and leave time for questions here. We can also live demo things here if you have specific questions for either me or John. Take this gentleman right here. The question was, is the attitude indicator available with Performance Plus? The answer is the attitude indicator is actually available for all of our subscriptions. If you want to have synthetic vision, which is basically more than just the attitude indicator, you want to have obstacles, terrain, and all those other things within the view, you must have Pro Plus or Performance Plus. But to note, the attitude indicator will not work unless you have a device that is providing your iPad a source of attitude information. So you need something like a Sentry Plus, a connection to your panel that has an attitude indicator in order for the iPad to even know what your attitude is. Good question. Yes, sir, right here. Yeah, so the question there was related to if you are a Civil Air Patrol member and you have the military subscription of ForeFlight, what features are available? There's quite a lot of things that could be different there. So what I'd actually point you to is online on our subscription advisor. It'll show you what the plan comparison differences are between those things. White shirt, yeah. Okay, the question was, why can't you show the datalink clouds layer and the datalink precipitation radar layer at the same time on the iPad? Is that correct? Okay. The reason for that is actually mostly technical, but I appreciate you asking. It's basically related to how we show raster maps at the same time because they overlap on the same point in space. It's something we've looked at doing, but I don't have a timeline for you there. That is an excellent question. The question was, can you choose between XM precipitation radar and FIS-B precipitation radar on your map and what you're seeing? The answer is that you used to not be able to do that, but as of, don't quote me on this, but I think December of last year or January of this year, we actually released that as a new capability. So now, if you're connected to an XM device and an ADS-B device, you'll actually see two different options for radar. You'll see radar XM and radar ADS-B, and you can select which source you want to look at. So there was a comment is, there are scenarios by which if your panel does not support a particular type of waypoint, it depends on the panel and the database installed in it, there are certain waypoints that your panel may not accept from ForeFlight. But if you do run into an issue like that, feel free to email us at team@foreflight.com and we can kind of help you through that and figure out why that particular waypoint is not transferring. Yes, sir, in the green. Yeah, so that's there's a comment about If you're looking at I'm assuming you're probably looking at the aeronautical layer, which is a vectorized map. If you look at vectorized maps in ForeFlight, the size of the labels will be dynamic based on what's in view, right? They can move position, they can change orientation and size. If you're looking at a raster map, which is like an old school, you're thinking of just a map, right? Like an IFR chart, those, as you zoom in, they do get bigger with size. Roger, we can talk about it after and look, and I can see what's going on there.
So the compatibility link is?
So you can either go get our brochure in our booth, but if you want to have a digital copy of the compatibility chart, it's foreflight.com/buying-guide-PDF. Buying-guide-PDF. Yes, sir, right here. So the question is flight plan transfer different if you're using Sentry as opposed to FlightStream 510 from Garmin? So Sentry does not connect to your panel at all. So there's no flight plan transfer capability with Sentry because it doesn't have a flight plan per se. So if you want to send flight plans to your Garmin panel, you will need a FlightStream 510 or FlightStream 210. And whether you're connected to Sentry or not does not affect that at all. So, for example, my personal setup is I fly with a FlightStream 510 connected over Bluetooth to my iPad and a Sentry Plus on my window connected to my iPad over Wi-Fi. Yes, sir, next to him.
So when you're looking at traffic, like I'm connected to my panel and it shows me the 30 miles of traffic. Like coming into Oshkosh, I wanted to go back to internet, flying low enough and I had internet like that. Is there a way to toggle that in order between ADS-B traffic from the panel and the broader picture so I can see where it's coming into Oshkosh or other miles away?
No, internet traffic is disabled while you're airborne.
There's no way to turn that on all the way.
No. Was there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate your time, and we'll stick around after if you have any other individual questions. Give me 1 second. Sir. Or you can stay right there. How can I help you?
So it's buying dash guide.
Dash PDF.
Oh,